I think it begs the question of all of us. What if, right now in our lives today, what if we went this way instead of that way? What would that other road less taken, what would that be like? And sometimes I think that's enough of an encouragement for us to go, I will choose that path.
Dennis, thanks for taking some time to chat with me today.
All right. Thanks for having me on. It's going to be a fun interview. I appreciate you taking time.
Oh, of course. This book, Empires of Dirt, first of all, it's a sequel to a book you wrote a few years ago. And it kind of asks a what if question. What if Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln had not been assassinated?
It's an amazing question, especially in the month of November, 60 years ago to the 22nd of November to the day, that I suppose got me thinking about it a number of years ago to wonder what it would look like to put a book together and examine that.
It's these four men's lives. It's Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Abraham Lincoln. Obviously, the latter three there are very influential figures in 20th century history. What was the reason you wanted to include Lincoln as part of the story?
That's a great question. Rhett, I really came to the conclusion that he was almost more powerful in terms of molding the 20th century than we can even imagine. Though he died in 1865, he was a relatively young man. They call him Old Abe. He was elected when he was only 52, and that's just 6 years older than Kennedy was when Kennedy was elected. So yeah, 52 in the 1860s might have seemed old, but the reality was there were people that lived to their 80s and 90s that were involved in that phase of American politics. Well, when Lincoln passed, a number of things unfolded, and from a historian's perspective, I'm fascinated by the lack of quality of the individuals that followed him, and the sort of carousel of idiocy that occurred in terms of not just domestic policy, but even foreign policy that began and that had no real fingerprints in terms of what the Monroe Doctrine meant here or our relationship with what we could do there in Europe. Hence, when World War I happened, it was founded on, of course, incredible, insecure, and very, very difficult times across the globe based on Queen Victoria's family and all of her kids and grandkids that all issued forth into about 8, 9, 10 different nations that her family was directly related to. Well, fascinating enough, Lincoln's two secretaries that he had in the White House, John G. Nicolay and John Hay, were two men from Springfield who were both young in 1865. And even after he was assassinated, both men played huge roles in American politics when they were allowed in. See, Lincoln would have brought them all the way with him, but instead, when he died, their political careers died. It wasn't until later when John Hay became ultimately Secretary of State, and then twice he was almost President of the United States because of no seated vice president. A couple of vice presidents had died, and the president almost died. So twice this man that would have leaned on and depended on Abraham Lincoln was right at that crucial point in global politics in 1900, 1903, 1904. Had Lincoln been there, it would have been, I think, a completely different global outcome. I think he would have been, with his vision and his view and what he had suffered through in 1860s, he would have been a great addition to the global community to talk.
It certainly is a compelling thought to think about. What would the country be like if he had lived? How would history have been different? I am curious, though, Lincoln and JFK are 100 years apart in history. Is there, aside from the fact that they were both assassinated, is there any other connection weaving these two men's lives together?
Well, I think that certainly over the years, there have been these sort of almost uh, voodoo-ish kind of connections. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy, and Kennedy had a junior secretary named Lincoln. They had all these crazy things. You can look it up on the internet. It's pretty fascinating, but it's more happenstance and accidental oddness. In terms of public policy, in terms of how they ran the government, both men had a wonderful big picture view of how to deal with people. For example, when General Meade, who had just been given the duties of being the top general of the Union Army, came to Gettysburg and found himself face to face with Lee, he ran for 3 strong days the entire operations of Gettysburg. Lincoln's telegraph system was, of course, broken down because of the Confederates. So Lincoln, who normally had some incredible command and control, was unable to do anything with Meade's army. And so when Meade, after the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July of Gettysburg, had the opportunity to crush Robert E. Lee's army. Literally, Lee was up against the Potomac. He was down to the dregs of his command, and Meade stopped it and gave his men rest, which gave Lee the opportunity to then, over 11 days, move his men across the Potomac. Well, when Lincoln found out about this, he was livid at the foolishness of this military man who knew better. In fact, he wrote him a letter that was never delivered, but ultimately is in the sort of the files of Abraham Lincoln, the archives, where he said, "You had him within your grasp, and you let him go, and now we face untold death because of you." Well, Kennedy, much the same way, when he came in and had to deal with what Eisenhower, another military man, had developed as president regarding the Bay of Pigs. Once it was such a disaster that he inherited, was livid and could not trust what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And I think because Kennedy did have a little bit of military, just like Lincoln did have a little bit of military in their background, they both viewed the pompous arrogance of the equivalent of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on both ends of that century with great trepidation. And so I think that balance, that's number one. Number two, both men were incredibly funny. They had humor that people were astounded by, and some of the things in Empires of Dirt that I've been able to dig up and research on both men, it really does capture that humor. Lincoln was a great fan of music. He would invite groups of balladeers into the White House, and they would literally play for his family and the White House staff. Kennedy did the same. They brought comedians in. Why? Because at one point, one of his cabinet secretaries said to him, "Why is it that you always have to be laughing, Mr. Lincoln? Why?" And the president responded back to him with a simple statement: "If I didn't laugh, I would most assuredly always cry." Now think about that, you know? And I think because of what John Kennedy came through, World War II, the Cold War, right on the verge of Vietnam, I think his humor kept him sharp. And that I think the final thing was that both were men of faith. Now, you can argue all day long from a Southerner's point of view that you know, Lincoln's comment about doesn't matter what side God's on, it matters whether we're on God's side. You can argue that. Southern Baptists might say, "Oh, he was a terrible man." He wasn't. People who are not Catholic could say, "Oh, Kennedy was controlled in some fashion by his Catholic theology." He wasn't. Both men had frailties, and Lincoln. The case can be made that Lincoln absolutely dishonored his vice president of the United States by not standing up and saying, "Yes, come join me for the second administration. Most people don't realize that Andrew Johnson was not his first vice president. A man named Hannibal Hamlin, who was brilliant and literally should have been president of the United States after that. Well, he allowed manipulation and political intrigue to occur. Kennedy had his own relational challenges with women. So you see the good, the bad, back and forth. Both men were cut down. And my question in Empires of Dirt was, what would have happened had they lived? And I hope I make a compelling argument that it would have, in terms of Lincoln living, he would ultimately have resigned his position as president so that Hannibal Hamlin could take over the duties that Hamlin was trained to do, not the duties. Lincoln was totally ill-equipped to do the administration, let alone the legislative lobbying and all the things that needed to be done. He'd only served one term in Congress, and Hannibal Hamlin had been governor of Maine, senator and leader. And I believe that Lincoln, because he said, I'll do whatever it takes to save the Union. If it means I'll keep the slaves, I'll do it. If it means I'll free the slaves, I'll do it. I believe that in the last analysis, Lincoln would have resigned, given it over to Hamlin, and then Hamlin would have served, which would then have led a number of different people into the White House because of him.
Interesting. Fascinating. So Empires of Dirt, where can people get this?
If they go to dennismansfield.com /author, dennismansfield.com/author. I made a decision to, in the past, I've had my books published by Simon & Schuster, by Endurance Press, by iUniverse. I've had a number of wonderful publishers. But I decided I'm going to go Idaho on this. And so there's a company called ConvertKit, convertkit.com. And Nathan Barry is the CEO of it. And I, about a year ago, began a newsletter that has just grown like crazy. I put it out twice a month. And I never would have thought that that kind of familiarity and loyalty to not just the new book, but my newsletters, and really even my original book, which is To Trust in What We Cannot See. People have been reaching out, buying it there on that website. And I've been thrilled. I really have been. It's fun to see people's minds say, what if? The first book, the brief synopsis of that was simply, there was actually a cafe in Vienna that had, in 1913, the following young men who were blue-collar workers living right around it and going in to get coffee. Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, Trotsky, and Tito all lived around this cafe. This is truth. And they all went in, they played chess against each other.
This is before any of them were world leaders.
Yeah, they literally spoke German to each other. Stalin's German was horrible, but they knew each other. And I'm an avid bike rider, and my wife and I biked across Europe about 7 years ago, and we came across the cafe, and I went in and I went, I've got to write about this.
Wow.
So this is the story. That's book one. So if you could say, what would happen if you could either change those men, those evil men, or terminate their lives? What would the world be like? And then, being if you could save their lives.
Yeah. So that you actually went on a bike ride in Vienna for that first book.
Yeah.
What was it that sparked your, what was the inspiration for this second one?
I think it was based on the reality that if there was a scientific way to work through space-time, and because of my background in college, I loved physics, and I'm a very avid reader, and a book called The Elegant Universe impacted me. It was a Pulitzer Prize runner-up in 1999, and the author positioned a whole series of things about the spatial reality. Instead of 4 dimensions, he predicated the new science of 11 dimensions, which is now the accepted scientific baseline and meridian. And so I'm like, dude, can I tap into your research? And he was like, yeah, let's have some fun. So I wrote that book with that idea of what if. When that happened, then I said, well, what if we could save some critical lives? What would that look like? And hence, it's been 3 years of labor of love, of incredible detailed research. And in fact, dependence on the White House, both through the Trump administration and the Biden administration. The White House Historical Association has been a great help to me on detailing what the executive mansion would have looked like, what the rooms were like in 1861 through 63. Just a tremendous help there. And the other thing is, one of my characters, Rhett, you will love this. One of my characters in the new book is C.S. Lewis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I reached out to the C.S. Lewis Foundation and said, on November 22nd, 1963, John Kennedy was killed. Just an hour before that, C.S. Lewis died.
That's right.
And Aldous Huxley died just a few hours after Kennedy. So I wove those three men into this new story, and I wanted C.S. Lewis to have front and center position on it. So I asked the foundation if I could, with honor and dignity and appropriateness, bring him in as a character. And Stan Matson, the founder of the C.S. Lewis Foundation, gave me thumbs up. And Lewis, is there. Most people think of him only as the guy that wrote Narnia and all the others, but he wrote a trilogy of space-time books, and they're called the Space Trilogy, and they're just incredible books. He wrote them 10 years before he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. So I brought that young Lewis in, and it's not like a soup, but it's like a stew where every individual part is there, and the broth in it is space-time and love of history and the what ifs.
That is absolutely fascinating.
It really does ask, I think it begs the question of all of us. What if, right now in our lives today, what if we went this way instead of that way? What would that other road less taken, what would that be like? And sometimes I think that's enough of an encouragement for us to go, I will choose that path.